I thought my life would die slowly amidst the smell of frying oil and bills. Then a billionaire walked into our diner, paid every penny, and left without a dime for a tip. But under his plate lay a note. Just one sentence. It dragged my life out of its lie. If your family treats you like a cash machine, listen closely, because the twist at part 10 will make you question blood ties forever. My name is Marlo Hayes, and I am 34 years old, though most days my spine feels like it belongs to a woman twice that age. If you cut me open, I am pretty sure I would not bleed red. I would bleed coffee grounds, cheap maple syrup, and the murky, saltwater humidity that clings to everything here in Charleston, South Carolina. The Harbor Skillet Diner does not have air conditioning that works properly. It has a heavy industrial hum that rattles the windows, but does nothing to stop the sweat from trickling down the back of my neck. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday, the dead hour between the lunch rush and the early bird dinner crowd, but I was moving at a sprint. I had been on my feet since 5 in the morning. That was 9 hours straight without sitting down, without a break, and without a single moment of silence. Glenn was shouting from the kitchen window, "He is not my biological father, but he is the man who raised me. So I call him Dad out of a habit that feels more like a shackle these days." He rang the service bell 3 times in rapid succession, a sharp, piercing sound that made my teeth ache. "Order up, Marlo," he yelled, his voice rough from 40 years of smoking cheap cigarettes. "Table 6 is waiting on their eggs. Do not let it get cold." I wiped my hands on my apron, which was already stained with grease and ketchup. I grabbed the plates. The ceramic was hot enough to burn my fingertips, but my skin had calloused over a decade ago. I walked the floor, smiling that automatic, dead-eyed smile that every waitress learns within her first week. "Here you go, folks," I said, sliding the plates down in front of a tourist couple who looked like they had been sunburnt since 1999. "Can I get you anything else? More iced tea?" They did not look at me. They just grunted and started eating. That is the thing about being a server in a place like this. You are not a person. You are a delivery system for calories. You are part of the furniture, just slightly more mobile than the vinyl booths. I walked back to the counter and started stacking dirty dishes. My mother, Darlene, again, not by blood, but by circumstance, was sitting at the register, staring at a stack of overdue invoices with a look of tragic martyrdom that she had perfected. She was not working. She was performing stress. "We are underwater, Marley," she sighed, loud enough for me to hear over the clatter of silverware. The supplier raised the price on bacon by 15%. 15%. How are we supposed to survive that? If we do not come up with $2,000 by Friday, they are going to cut off our credit line. I kept scrubbing a coffee stain off the counter. I knew where this was going. It was a script we had rehearsed 1,000 times. "I can pick up the closing shift tonight," I said, my voice flat. "That will save us having to pay Tina." Darlene looked up, her eyes wide and wet. "Oh, honey, you are such a good girl. I do not know what we would do without you. This place, it is all we have. It is your legacy too. You know, when Glenn and I are gone, all of this belongs to you." Legacy. That word tasted like ash in my mouth. They always talked about the diner like it was a grand estate, a precious jewel they were polishing for me. But I knew the truth. The Harbor Skillet was not an inheritance. It was an anchor. It was a debt that kept accumulating interest, and the currency being spent was my life. I walked into the back room to grab more napkins and checked my phone quickly, hiding it behind a stack of flour sacks. I opened my banking app. I had been siphoning off $5 here, $10 there, hiding my tips in a separate digital account that Glenn and Darlene did not know about. I wanted to take a certification course in hospitality management. It cost $800. It was my ticket out. I could get a job at one of the big hotels downtown, somewhere with benefits and a human resources department and shifts that actually ended. I looked at the balance. It read 0. My stomach dropped so hard I felt nauseous. I refreshed the screen. Still 0. I tapped on the transaction history. A transfer of $640 had been made that morning to the joint account, the account Darlene had access to. I walked back out to the register, my hands shaking. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "did you touch my savings account?" Darlene did not even look up from her calculator. She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, yes, Glenn needed to pay the mechanic for the freezer. The compressor died this morning. We just borrowed it. Marley, do not be dramatic." "Borrowed," I repeated. "That was for my class. I told you I was enrolling next month." Darlene slammed her hand down on the counter. The few customers in the diner looked over, but she did not care. Drama was her favorite fuel. "Are you being selfish again?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "After everything we have done for you? We took you in when you had nobody. We put clothes on your back. And now, when the family business is drowning, you are worried about some silly little class? The freezer cost $1,200. Marlo, we barely covered half of it with your little stash. You should be thanking us for keeping this roof over your head, not accusing us of stealing." I stood there, frozen. It was not the money. I could earn the money back in 2 months of double shifts. It was the entitlement. It was the absolute certainty that everything I had, everything I was, belonged to them. They did not see a daughter standing in front of them. They saw a resource, a battery to be drained until it was dry. I turned around and walked away because if I stayed there, I was going to scream. And screaming would only prove Glenn right when he said I was emotionally unstable. I went to refill the ketchup bottles at the far end of the counter. The bell on the door jingled, and Caleb walked in. Caleb Rowe is the only thing in my life that feels real. He works at the boatyard down the street, sanding hulls and fixing engines. He always smells like sawdust and industrial solvent, a sharp, clean smell that cuts through the grease of the diner. He is 35, with hands that are permanently stained with oil and eyes that see too much. "Coffee, black," he said, sitting on the stool nearest to where I was standing. "And you look like hell." "Marlo." "Thanks," I muttered, pouring the coffee. My hand slipped, and a few drops splashed onto the saucer. I wiped it up aggressively. "I am serious," he said, lowering his voice. "I saw Darlene at the bank this morning. She looked happy. That usually means you lost something." "She took it," I whispered, not looking at him. "The money for the course. All of it." Caleb slammed his hand on the counter, making the silverware jump. "That is theft. Marlo, you need to cut them off. Get your own account. Move out. You are 34 years old. Why are you still letting them hold the keys to your life?" "It is complicated," I said, the automatic defense rising up. "They are my parents. They are struggling. They are drowning, and they are using you as a life raft," Caleb said, his voice hard. "Look at you. You are gray. You have not taken a day off in 6 months. You are not living. Marley, you are just functioning. You are a machine they plug in every morning and unplug at night." I looked out the window at the harbor. The water was choppy today, gray waves slapping against the pylons. I wanted to be angry at him, but I could not, because he was right. I was exhausted. Not just tired, but hollowed out. I felt like a piece of driftwood that had been battered against the rocks for so long that there was no shape left, just a smooth, worn-down surface. "I have to get back to work," I said, pulling away. Caleb grabbed my wrist, gently. His thumb brushed over the calluses on my palm. "One day, you are going to wake up and realize you waited too long," he said. "Do not let them eat your whole life." I pulled my hand away and went back to the kitchen. Glenn was yelling about a burnt piece of toast. I scraped the black char off the bread with a knife, the sound rasping in my ears like a scream. I took the toast out to table 4. I poured more coffee. I wiped down a booth where a toddler had smashed a banana into the upholstery. I smiled. I apologized. I existed. Around 4 o'clock, the wind changed. Usually, the afternoon lull is heavy and sleepy, but suddenly, the air in the diner seemed to vibrate. It was a low thrumming sound, like a deep bass note that you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. I looked up from the napkin dispenser I was refilling. Outside, the bright, harsh sunlight was reflecting off something sleek and metal. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb. They were not the usual cars we saw here. We got minivans packed with screaming kids, rusted pickup trucks with fishing gear in the back, or the occasional rental sedan from the airport. These cars were massive. Cadillacs, maybe, or Lincolns. Their windows were tinted so dark they looked like voids cut out of the afternoon air. They parked in a perfect line, taking up the entire front loading zone, blocking the view of the ocean. The engines cut off simultaneously. The silence that followed was heavy, pressurized. Inside the diner, everything stopped. The old man eating soup at the counter paused with his spoon halfway to his mouth. Darlene stopped typing on her calculator. Even Glenn stuck his head out of the kitchen window, wiping his hands on a rag. "What in the world is that?" Darlene whispered. "Is it the health inspector? Or the police?" "It is not the police," I said, moving instinctively toward the window. "Police cars do not shine like that. Police cars look used. These cars looked like they had never seen a speck of dust in their lives." The driver's door of the lead car opened. A man stepped out. He was huge, wearing a black suit that looked tailored to hide muscles, not just cover them. He wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He scanned the street, then the diner windows. His gaze swept over me, and for a second, I felt a chill run down my spine, cold and sharp. He opened the back door of the middle SUV. A leg stepped out, pressed trousers, a shoe that probably cost more than the new freezer Darlene was screaming about. Then the man emerged. He was older, perhaps 75 or 80. He had white hair, perfectly combed, and he stood with a posture that defied his age. He adjusted his jacket, took a breath of the salty air, and looked up at the faded, peeling sign of the Harbor Skillet Diner. He did not look like a tourist. He looked like a man who had just arrived to foreclose on reality. He walked toward the door, flanked by 2 security guards. The bell above the door jingled, a cheerful, tinny sound that felt completely ridiculous in the face of this sudden, imposing gravity. "Welcome to the Harbor Skillet," Darlene squeaked, her voice jumping an octave. The man did not look at her. He looked straight at me. His eyes were gray, the color of the ocean before a storm, and they held zero warmth. "Table for 1, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the room like a gavel striking a desk, and I would prefer not to be disturbed. I stood there, clutching a dirty rag, feeling the floor shift beneath my feet. I did not know it then, but the timer on my old life had just hit 0. The caisson was rolling, and the funeral for Marlo Hayes, the waitress, had officially begun. The man moved through the diner with a kind of gravitational pull that bent the room around him. He did not look at the menu board above the counter with its peeling plastic letters and grease-stained prices. He walked straight to the corner booth, the one with the best view of the harbor, where the sunlight hit the water and turned the gray waves into sheets of hammered metal. This was usually the spot where teenagers carved their initials into the varnish or where fishermen nursed hangovers. But as he sat down, the booth seemed to upgrade itself. He placed a hand on the table, and I noticed his fingers were long, manicured, and completely free of rings or jewelry. Glenn practically vibrated out of the kitchen. The smell of desperation coming off him was stronger than the scent of the burning onions on the grill. He grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging into the muscle. "Marlo," he hissed, his voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper he used when he thought he was being clever. "You take him. Do not let Tina go near that table. She talks too much. This guy reeks of money, real money, not credit card debt money. You treat him like royalty, you hear me? We need a win today." He shoved me forward, physically pushing me toward the shark tank. I smoothed my apron, took a breath that tasted of stale coffee, and walked over. Up close, the man was even more imposing. He was older, certainly past 70, but his face was not soft. It was carved from granite, deep lines running around his mouth and eyes that suggested a lifetime of making hard decisions. He wore a charcoal sweater that looked like cashmere, the kind that costs more than my entire car, and trousers that held a razor-sharp crease. "Good afternoon, sir," I said, keeping my voice level. Can I get you started with something to drink? He did not look at the menu. He looked at me. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they dissected me. He was not looking at my face or my body in the way men usually did in this town. He was looking at my posture. He was looking at the way my hands were clasped behind my back. He was checking for tremors. Water, he said. His voice was dry, like paper sliding over wood. Mineral, no ice, and I require privacy. I do not want to be asked how the food is every 5 minutes. I do not want refills unless I signal. I am not here to be entertained. Understood. I said, I am Bennett Kessler, he added, as if testing to see if the name meant anything to me. It did not. But the way he said it suggested that in other rooms, in high-rise buildings and boardrooms, that name stopped conversations. The 2 men who had come in with him, the mountains in suits, had taken a table near the door, their backs to the wall, watching the room with professional paranoia. Nice to meet you, Mr. Kessler. I am Marlowe. He ignored the pleasantry. For lunch, I will have the field greens, no dressing, just olive oil and lemon on the side, and the catch of the day, pan-seared, not fried. If it comes breaded, I will send it back. We have flounder today. Sir, I said, I can have the chef sear it with herbs. Do that, he said, and bring me the check with the meal. I do not like to wait. I nodded and backed away. As I walked to the kitchen, I felt a strange sensation between my shoulder blades. It was the feeling of being watched through the scope of a rifle. I put the order in. Glenn looked at the ticket and frowned. No fries, no appetizer, no beer? He grumbled. Cheapskate. He is particular. I said, make sure the fish is not burnt. Dad, please. While the food cooked, I went back to my rotation. The diner was filling up with the mid-afternoon crowd. A group of tourists had pushed 2 tables together and were loudly debating where to go for dinner, completely oblivious to the fact that they were currently eating in a restaurant. A baby was crying in a high chair near the window. I moved through the chaos, refilling teas, bussing tables, and dodging the busboy who was texting while walking. Every time I crossed the room, I could feel Bennett Kessler's eyes on me. He sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table, watching. He watched when Table 4, a regular named Mr. Henderson, who was known for being difficult, snapped his fingers at me because he dropped his fork. Hey, girl, Henderson barked. I need a fork. Clean this time. I stopped, took a fresh fork from the roll-up station, and walked over. I did not sigh. I did not roll my eyes. I placed the fork down gently. I am sorry about that. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice calm, stripping away any hint of sarcasm. Here's a fresh one. Can I get you a refill on your coffee while I'm here? Henderson grunted, disarmed by the lack of friction. Yeah, sure. As I turned away, I glanced at the corner booth. Bennett Kessler was looking at me. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a friendly nod. It was the kind of nod a scientist gives when a lab rat navigates a maze correctly. Why was he watching me? I felt a cold prickle of anxiety. Was he a health inspector? A secret shopper for some corporate chain looking to buy the property? No, he was too expensive for that. This felt personal. It felt like an audit of my soul. I brought out his food. The plate was hot. The fish seared perfectly. I had stood over Glenn to make sure of it. I placed it down, along with the oil and lemon. Is there anything else I can get you, Mr. Kessler? He looked at the plate, then up at me. Dessert, he said. Something homemade. Not something from a frozen box. What do you have that is actually made in this building? My mother makes the peach cobbler, I said. The crust is made from scratch this morning. Bring it, he said. I went to cut the slice. Darlene was hovering by the pass-through window, her eyes darting toward the corner booth. Is he eating? She whispered. Does he look happy? I bet he leaves $100. I can feel it. Look at those shoes. Those are Italian leather. Stop counting the money before it is on the table. Mom, I said, scooping the cobbler into a bowl. You better be charming him. Marlo, she warned, her voice tightening. Smile more. You look so severe today. Nobody tips a girl who looks like she is at a funeral. I walked the dessert out. As I approached table 3, a young boy, maybe 7 years old, suddenly swung his arm out, knocking a full glass of chocolate milk off the edge. The glass shattered on the tile floor. Brown liquid splattered everywhere, onto the floor, onto the boy's legs, and across the hem of my jeans. The mother gasped, "Oh my God, Tyler!" The boy started wailing. The father looked annoyed, glaring at me as if I had telekinetically thrown the milk. "Great," the father snapped. "Now his shorts are ruined. Do you not have lids for these cups?" The diner went quiet. This was the moment where a waitress usually snaps. I was tired. My feet were throbbing. I was covered in chocolate milk, and I was being blamed for gravity. I took a deep breath. I compartmentalized the anger, folded it up into a tiny square, and shoved it into the back of my mind. "I am so sorry," I said, grabbing a stack of towels from my apron. "Are you folks okay? No glass on anyone?" I knelt down, ignoring the sticky coldness seeping into my pants. I cleaned the mess efficiently, sweeping the glass into a dustpan, wiping the floor until it was dry so no one would slip. I stood up and smiled at the boy who was still crying. "It is just milk. Buddy," I said softly. "Accidents happen. I will bring you a new one, okay? With extra whipped cream this time, but we will put it in a plastic cup, just to be safe." The father's face softened. He looked embarrassed. "Thanks, miss. Sorry about the mess." "It is no trouble," I lied. I turned to head back to the kitchen and found myself locked in Bennett Kessler's gaze. He had stopped eating. His fork was resting on the edge of his plate. He was studying me with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. He did not smile, but there was a shift in his expression. A calculation had been completed. I brought him his cobbler and the check. The total was $42.15. "Thank you, Mr. Kessler," I said, placing the black folder on the table. He did not reach for his wallet immediately. He looked at the cobbler, took a single bite, and then looked at me. "You are good at this," he said. It was a statement, not a compliment. "I have had a lot of practice," I replied. He leaned back, the leather of the booth creaking. "Most people would have yelled at the father," he said, "or at least rolled their eyes when they turned around. You did not. You absorbed the chaos. It is part of the job, sir." "Is it?" he asked. "Or is it just what you have been trained to do? To clean up other people's messes without complaining?" The question hit me hard, piercing through the professional armor I wore. It felt too intimate, too accurate. I did not know how to answer, so I just gave a tight smile. "Enjoy the cobbler," I said, and walked away. I went behind the counter to wait. The air in the diner felt thick, pressurized. Glenn was watching from the kitchen window. Darlene was pretending to count receipts, but was watching the corner booth like a hawk. Even the busboy seemed to know something was happening. We were all waiting for the transaction. We were waiting for the benevolence of the rich man to trickle down and save our mediocre Tuesday. Bennett Kessler finished his dessert. He wiped his mouth with the linen napkin I had specially found for him. He pulled out a black leather wallet. He removed 2 bills and some coins. He stood up. The 2 security guards immediately straightened up, ready to move. Bennett buttoned his jacket. He did not look back at me. He walked toward the door with the same silent, terrifying grace he had entered with. I walked over to the table. Glenn was already halfway out of the kitchen, a greedy grin on his face. "How much?" Glenn asked, rubbing his hands together. Did he leave a 50, 100? I opened the black folder. Inside lay 2 $20 bills, 2 $1 bills, and a dime and a nickel. $42.15. The exact amount of the bill. There was no tip, not a single penny. My heart hammered in my chest. I stared at the money, confused. The service had been perfect. The food was perfect. He had even complimented me. "He stiffed you?" Glenn's voice rose to a shout, shattering the quiet. "That cheap bastard. He stiffed you." Darlene rushed over. looking at the empty folder as if it were a crime scene. "I cannot believe it," she screeched. "Look at him, walking out to a Cadillac, and he cannot leave $5. I stood there, frozen. I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. It was not about the money, it was the judgment. He had watched me. He had tested me. And apparently, I had failed. I was worth 0. I reached out to pick up the empty dessert plate, my hand trembling slightly with a mix of rage and exhaustion. As I lifted the plate, something white caught my eye. There, folded into a tight, sharp square, was a piece of paper hidden directly underneath the china. It was not a bill, it was a note. I palmed it quickly, before Glenn or Darlene could see. I did not know why, but instinct told me that whatever was on this paper was not for them. It was mine. "What is it?" Darlene asked, seeing my hand move. "Did he leave cash under the plate?" "No," I said, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. "Just a napkin." I shoved the paper into my apron pocket, right next to my waitressing pad. It burned against my hip, hot and heavy, a secret that felt heavier than the trays I had carried all day. The silence that followed Bennett Kessler's departure was thick enough to choke on. The bell above the door gave one last cheerful jingle as it closed behind him, sealing the diner back into its mundane reality. But inside, the air felt stripped of oxygen. I stood there holding the black folder. The $42.15 inside felt less like payment and more like an insult. It was a mathematical slap in the face. He had calculated the tax, the cost of the mineral water, the exact price of the fish, and he had stopped his generosity precisely at the decimal point. Glenn kicked the trash can in the kitchen so hard it dented. "Unbelievable!" he shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Did you see that? Did you see that, Darlene?" He walked in here like he owned the eastern seaboard, made Marlowe jump through hoops, and he did not leave a dime, not one single dime. Darlene was staring at the table where Bennett had sat, her mouth hanging open in a mix of horror and offense. "Maybe he forgot," she whispered, clutching her chest. "Maybe he is senile. Rich people get forgetful, right? Marlowe, run after him. Tell him he forgot the gratuity. I am not chasing a customer down the street to beg for $5. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I looked through the window. Bennett was standing by the open door of his SUV. He paused before getting in. He turned his head and looked back at the diner. Through the glass, our eyes locked. He was waiting. I knew it in my bones. He was waiting to see if I would run out screaming. He was waiting to see if the polite, professional waitress would crack and reveal a bitter, entitled person underneath. He wanted to see if I was like my parents. I did not move. I did not frown. I just stood there, holding his empty plate, and gave him a small, acknowledging nod. He held my gaze for a second longer, a second that felt like an hour, and then he got into the car. The heavy door slammed shut, and the convoy of black vehicles pulled away, disappearing into the coastal traffic. He did it on purpose. I realized the 0 tip was not an accident. It was the final question on the exam. I turned back to the table to clear the rest of the dishes. Glenn was still ranting in the kitchen, banging pots and pans to express his frustration. Darlene was muttering about how we were going to pay the electric bill now that her imaginary windfall had evaporated. I reached for the main dinner plate. My hand brushed against something underneath the rim. I remembered the flash of white I had seen earlier. The paper I had quickly palmed and shoved into my apron pocket in a blur of instinct. I needed to know what it was. I grabbed the stack of dirty dishes and walked quickly to the back, past the dish pit, past the walk-in freezer, and into the employee bathroom. It was the only place in the building with a lock. I turned the latch and leaned back against the cold, cracked tile of the door. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were shaking as I reached into my apron, bypassing the pad and the pen, and pulled out the small, folded square of paper. It was heavy stock, not a napkin. It felt expensive, like linen pressed into paper form. I unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged and sharp, written in black ink that looked wet against the page. It was not a long message. There was no salutation, no signature, just coordinates for a life I did not understand. 112 Sterling Road, Charlotte, North Carolina, Thursday, 7:30 in the evening. And below that, a single line that made the breath catch in my throat. If you want to change your life, come here and tell no one. I stared at the words until they blurred. Charlotte was a 3-hour drive from here. I had a shift on Thursday night. I had never missed a shift in 4 years. If I went, I would have to lie. I would have to steal time. Change your life. What did that mean? Was it a job offer? Was it a charity case? Or was it something darker? I thought about the way his security guards had scanned the room. I thought about the cold precision of his voice. Rich men did not just hand out opportunities to waitresses in failing diners. This could be a trap. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. It was a text from Darlene. "Stop hiding in the bathroom. Table 5 needs water." I shoved the note into my bra, hiding it against my skin. It felt hot, like a brand. I flushed the toilet just to make noise, washed my hands, and walked back out. For the next 2 hours, I was a ghost. I poured coffee, I took orders, I smiled at tourists, but my mind was racing down the highway toward Charlotte. At 6 o'clock, I took a trash bag out to the dumpster in the alley behind the kitchen. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the wet pavement. I pulled out my phone and dialed Caleb. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said, "I heard the big spender stiffed you. News travels fast in this town." "He left something else," I whispered, looking over my shoulder to make sure the back door was fully closed. "What? A bad review?" "A note," I said. I read him the address and the message. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the high-pitched whine of a sander in the background at his shop. "Marlowe," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a serious, low tone. "That sounds like the start of a horror movie. You cannot just drive to a strange address in another city, because a guy with a nice suit told you to. He knew things. Caleb, he watched me. It felt like a test." "Or it is a trafficking scheme," Caleb countered. "You do not know who this guy is. Bennett Kessler? I Googled him while you were talking. There is almost nothing on him, just a few mentions in corporate filings for holding companies. He is a ghost with a bank account." "I have to go," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "Why? Because you hate the diner? That is not a good enough reason to get kidnapped." "Because I have nothing to lose." I said, "Look at me. Caleb, I am 34. I have $0 in my savings account because my parents stole it this morning. I am going to die in this apron if I do not do something stupid." Caleb sighed, a long, frustrated exhalation. "Okay, if you are going, we do it smart. Send me a picture of the note. Send me the location. I will track your phone the entire time. If you do not text me a code word by 8 o'clock on Thursday, I am calling the police and I am driving up there with a tire iron." "Thank you," I breathed. "Do not thank me yet," he said. "Just promise me you will not get in a car with anyone. Take your own car. Park on the street." "I promise." I hung up and went back inside. The diner was busy now. The dinner rush in full swing. The noise was deafening, clattering plates, sizzling grease, the roar of conversations. I looked at Glenn and Darlene. They were arguing by the register. Glenn was pointing at a receipt, his face red. Darlene was wiping her eyes, playing the victim. They did not look up when I walked in. They did not ask if I was okay. They just pointed to a dirty table that needed bussing. "Get table 2, Glenn barked. "And hurry up. We are turning tables too slow tonight." I grabbed the bus tub and walked over to the table. I scraped leftover burger bun and cold fries into the bin. The smell of old grease filled my nose, a smell that had clung to my hair and clothes for 15 years. I looked at my parents again. They were not bad people. Not in the villainous sense. They were just small. They were trapped in their own cycle of debt and bad decisions, and they had pulled me in to be the load-bearing wall for their collapsing house. I felt the note scratching against my skin. I am not a wall. I thought, I am a person, and on Thursday, I am going to break out. The lock on the cage clicked open in my mind, It was terrifying. It was dangerous. But for the first time in my life, the door was ajar. Thursday arrived with a heaviness that felt physical, pressing down on my lungs like the humid air before a hurricane. Asking for time off was something I simply did not do. In the ecosystem of the Hayes family, my presence was as mandatory as the electricity or the running water. I waited until the lunch rush died down before I approached Glenn. He was scraping grease off the flat-top grill, his back to me. "I need to leave at 4 today," I said. My voice was steady, rehearsed a dozen times in the mirror of the employee bathroom. "I cannot work the dinner shift." Glenn spun around, the spatula clanging against the metal surface, his face contorted with immediate, reflexive anger. "You what?" he barked. "We have a party of 12 coming in at 6 o'clock. The rowing team. Who is supposed to serve them? Me?" "I already called Tina." I lied. "She said she can come in early. I have an appointment." "An appointment?" Darlene chimed in from the register, not looking up from her magazine. "What kind of appointment? You do not have a doctor. You do not have a dentist. You do not have a boyfriend. So what is it, Marlo? Are you going to an audition for a reality show?" She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound meant to make me feel small. "It is personal," I said, untying my apron, "and I am not asking. I am telling you." I walked out the back door before Glenn could throw the spatula. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a tiny, insignificant rebellion. I drove home to my basement apartment, showered until the smell of diner grease was gone, and put on the only suit I owned. It was a navy blue pantsuit I had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago for a funeral. It was slightly tight in the shoulders, but it made me look like someone who had business to attend to, not someone who wiped tables for a living. I got into my car, a 10-year-old sedan that rattled when it went over 50 miles per hour, and pointed it north toward Charlotte. The drive took 3 hours. As the landscape shifted from the marshy lowlands of the coast to the rolling hills of the city, my anxiety spiked. I kept touching the piece of paper in my pocket, tracing the sharp edges of the fold. Caleb was tracking my phone. I had texted him when I left. "Heading up now." I had written, "If I stop moving for more than 20 minutes, call the cops." The address Bennett Kessler had given me was not in the city center. It was in a neighborhood called Myers Park, where the driveways were longer than the street I lived on, and the trees formed a canopy that blocked out the sky. I turned onto Sterling Road. The houses here were not houses. They were estates, stone walls, wrought iron gates, manicured lawns that looked like they had been cut with scissors. Number 112 was at the very end of a cul-de-sac. It was a fortress. A massive limestone structure sat far back from the road, hidden behind a 12-foot iron gate. There were cameras mounted on the pillars, their red eyes blinking in the twilight. I pulled my rattling car up to the intercom box. I rolled down my window. The air here was cooler, smelling of expensive mulch and silence. I did not even have to press the button. A voice crackled from the speaker. It was deep and devoid of emotion. "State your business." I cleared my throat. "My name is Marlo Hayes. I have an invitation." There was a pause, a long, agonizing silence where I was sure they were going to laugh and tell me to turn around. Then, the heavy iron gates began to swing open. "Ms. Hayes," the voice said. "Mr. Kessler is waiting." My blood ran cold. He knew. He had not just given out a flyer to a random waitress. He had given it to me, specifically, and he had instructed his security to expect me. I drove up the winding driveway, my tires crunching on gravel that looked like it had been raked that morning. I parked next to a fountain that was quietly bubbling in the center of a circular motor court. When I stepped out of the car, the front door of the mansion opened. A man in a dark suit, one of the security guards from the diner, stood there. He did not ask for ID. He just stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. The foyer was cavernous. The floor was black and white marble, polished to a mirror shine. A crystal chandelier hung from a ceiling that seemed miles away. It was quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a library. but the heavy, suffocating quiet of a vault. "Right this way," the guard said. He led me down a hallway lined with oil paintings of people who looked like they had owned railroads and steel mills. We stopped at a set of double mahogany doors. The guard knocked once, then opened them. Bennett Kessler was sitting in a leather wingback chair by a fireplace. There was no fire, just the cold, clean aesthetic of a room that was rarely used. He was wearing a different suit, this one gray, but he looked exactly as he had in the diner, imposing, sharp, and utterly out of place in my world. "Sit," he said, pointing to the chair opposite him. I sat. I kept my back straight, my hands folded in my lap, resisting the urge to fidget. "You came," he said. "You gave me an address," I replied. I was curious. "Curiosity is expensive," he said. "Usually, but in your case, it might be profitable." He picked up a file from the table next to him. I recognized the color of the folder. It was the same shade of black as the check presenter at the diner. "You are wondering about the tip," he said. "I am wondering why a billionaire would drive 3 hours to eat a $40 meal and then leave a cryptic note under a plate," I countered. "Because I needed to see how you handled disappointment," he said. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Anyone can be professional when they are being rewarded. Anyone can smile when the customer leaves 20%. But character is what happens when you do everything right and you get absolutely nothing in return." I stayed silent. "I watched you. Marlowe," he continued, "that father with the spilled milk. You did not shame him. The bill? You did not chase me. You did not throw a tantrum. You took the hit, and you kept your dignity." "I have a lot of practice taking hits," I said. "Exactly," he said, "and that is why you are here." He opened the folder and slid a single piece of paper across the low table toward me. It was an employment contract. "I want to offer you a job," he said. "Not at a diner. My company, Halcyon Harbor Group, manages luxury properties all over the Southeast. We have a problem. We have too many managers who know how to read spreadsheets, but do not know how to read people. They fall apart under pressure. They take things personally." I looked down at the paper. My eyes scanned the text. "Position: Junior Director of Guest Experience. Location: Charlotte headquarters." Then my eyes hit the salary line. $120,000 per year. I stopped breathing for a second. That was 4 times what I made at the diner in a good year. "Read the rest," Bennett said. I looked lower. Full medical benefits, a housing stipend of $3,000 a month, paid training, relocation assistance. I looked up at him, my mind reeling. This had to be a joke, or a mistake, or something illegal. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why me? There are thousands of people with degrees who would kill for this. I am a waitress. I barely finished community college." Bennett sat back, tenting his fingers. "Because those people with degrees have been taught that they are special," he said. "They feel entitled to success. You do not. You understand that the world owes you nothing. You understand service not as servitude, but as control. You controlled that dining room on Tuesday. I want you to control my hotels." "But I do not know anything about hotels," I said. "We can teach you systems," he said dismissively. "We cannot teach instinct. And we certainly cannot teach the kind of hunger I saw in your eyes when you looked at that empty check folder." He stood up and walked over to a window, looking out at the darkened grounds of his estate. "You have 24 hours to decide," he said. "If you sign, you start Monday. You leave Charleston. You leave that diner. You leave whatever anchors are holding you down." I thought of Glenn screaming about the rowing team. I thought of Darlene stealing my savings for a freezer. I thought of the grease that I could never quite scrub out of my pores. "Why are you doing this?" I asked again. "It feels like charity." Bennett turned around. His face was hard, shadows cutting across his features. "I do not do charity, Ms. Hayes. I make investments, and I believe you are undervalued assets. The question is, do you have the courage to walk away from the people who are keeping your price tag low?" He walked back to the chair and looked down at me. "Because you do not sell yourself for cheap emotion." Marlowe, that is a rare quality. Do not let your family spend it for you. I looked at the contract. I looked at the number. 120,000. It was not just money. It was a key. It was a weapon. I will sign it, I said. I did not need 24 hours. I did not even need 24 seconds. Bennett pulled a gold pen from his pocket and handed it to me. Good, he said. Welcome to the real world. I signed my name. The ink flowed smoothly, dark and permanent. As I finished the loop of the S in haze, I felt a strange vibration in the room, as if the house itself was acknowledging the transaction. I had just sold my labor to a stranger. But for the first time in my life, I knew the price was fair. The drive back from Charlotte to Charleston usually takes 3 hours, but that night, it felt like I was traveling between 2 different planets. I had a signed contract in my passenger seat that promised me a life I could not visualize, and I was heading back to a life that I was actively planning to detonate. When I pulled into the driveway of the small, peeling house I shared with my parents, it was past midnight. The lights in the kitchen were still on. They were waiting. I walked in, clutching my purse tight against my side. Glenn was sitting at the kitchen table with a half-empty can of cheap beer. Darlene was pacing the linoleum floor. Her arms crossed so tightly across her chest, she looked like she was holding herself together with staples. "Where have you been?" Glenn demanded, not even waiting for the door to close. "Do you know how embarrassed I was tonight?" The rowing team came in, and I had to tell them our best server decided to take a vacation. I did not apologize. For the first time in 15 years, the automatic "I am sorry" died in my throat. I went to Charlotte, I said, placing my keys on the table. I met with Bennett Kessler. Darlene stopped pacing, her face twisted into a sneer that was half fear, half mockery. "The rich guy who stiffed you?" she asked, her voice shrill. "You drove 3 hours to chase a tip?" "Marlowe, tell me you are not that desperate. That is pathetic, even for us." "He did not call me there for a tip," I said. "He offered me a job." Glenn laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound. "A job, right. Men like that do not offer jobs to girls like you. Marlowe, they offer arrangements. He wants a mistress, or a mule, or something worse. You are being played. You are going to wake up in a ditch or a jail cell." They went on like that for 5 minutes. They painted Bennett Kessler as a predator and me as a naive sheep. They listed every horror story they had ever seen on the news. For a moment, it almost sounded like concern. It almost sounded like they were worried about my safety. Then I cut them off. He offered me a salary of $120,000 a year. I said, the silence that followed was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if I had sucked all the air out of the room. Glenn's beer can stopped halfway to his mouth. Darlene blinked, her mouth slightly open. "What did you say?" Darlene whispered. $120,000, I repeated, enunciating every word, plus full medical, plus a housing allowance of $3,000 a month. The horror on their faces evaporated. The concern about me ending up in a ditch vanished. In its place, a new expression formed, a sharp, hungry look that I recognized from the way they looked at a full dining room during tourist season. Darlene pulled a chair out and sat down. Her eyes were suddenly bright. $120,000, she murmured, looking at Glenn. That is $10,000 a month. Before taxes, Glenn corrected automatically, his mind already running the numbers. But still, that is huge. Darlene turned to me. Her voice had changed. The shrillness was gone, replaced by a syrupy, cloying sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Well, honey," she said, leaning forward, "that is an incredible opportunity. We always knew you were special. We always said you were meant for bigger things than the diner. Didn't we, Glenn?" Glenn nodded, taking a slow sip of his beer. Yeah, we did. This could be good. This could be really good for the family." He looked at the ceiling, where a water stain had been spreading for 2 years. "We could finally fix the roof," he said, "and the grease trap in the kitchen needs a complete overhaul. That is $5,000 right there. And if we want to compete with the new bistro down the street, We need to redo the booths. Darlene reached across the table and patted my hand. Her palm was damp. If you are making $10,000 a month, surely you can live on 3 or 4, she said. The cost of living in Charlotte is not that high. If you sent us $4,000 a month, Marlo, we could have the diner debt-free in 2 years. Think about that. You could save the legacy. I sat there, frozen. Not once did they ask, "Are you scared to move?" Not once did they ask, "What is the job?" Not once did they ask, "Are you happy?" They did not care if Bennett Kessler was a predator. They did not care if I was walking into a trap. As long as the trap paid out $120,000 a year, they were willing to push me into it. I am not sending $4,000 a month, I said quietly. The smile on Darlene's face flickered. Excuse me? She said. I have expenses, I lied, and I need to save. I will send something, but it will not be half my paycheck. Glenn slammed his hand on the table. Do not be ungrateful. Marlo, we raised you. We put food in your mouth when nobody else wanted you. Now you strike gold, and you want to hoard it? That is not how family works. That is exactly how this family works, I thought. You take, and I give. I stood up. I am exhausted. I said, I am packing tomorrow. I start Monday. I went to my room and locked the door. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. I felt a profound sense of loneliness wash over me. I had hoped, deep down, that they would fight for me to stay because they would miss me. Instead, they were fighting for my wallet. The next day, I called Caleb to help me load my car. I did not have much, just 2 suitcases of clothes and a box of books. When I told him about the conversation, he did not look surprised. He just shook his head as he shoved my winter coat into the trunk. If they are supporting this now, it is because they think they won the lottery, Caleb said. They do not see a daughter leaving. They see a direct deposit arriving. You need to be careful. Marlo, if you stop paying, or if you do not pay enough, they are going to turn on you. They will guilt you. They will threaten you. I know. I said, I am going to set up a transfer. $500 a month. That is it. That is $500 too much, Caleb grunted, but it is your call. When I was ready to leave, Glenn was at the diner working the lunch shift. He did not come home to say goodbye. Darlene was in the living room, watching a game show. She did not get up. She did not hug me. She did not cry. I wrote down the routing number for the business account, she said, pointing to a scrap of paper on the coffee table. Make sure the transfer hits by the 1st of the month. The mortgage is due on the 5th. We do not want late fees. I picked up the paper. Goodbye. Darlene, I said. Drive safe, she replied, her eyes glued to the screen. And do not forget to call the bank. I walked out of the house. The sun was shining, bright and harsh. I got into my car and backed out of the driveway. As I turned onto the main road, I passed the Harbor Skillet Diner one last time. I saw Glenn through the window, yelling at a new waitress who looked terrified. I felt a weight lift off my chest, lighter than I had ever felt. I was free. I was escaping the smell of grease and the crushing weight of their expectations. But as I merged onto the highway, heading north toward Charlotte and the mysterious world of Bennett Kessler, a cold knot formed in my stomach. My parents had sold me for the promise of a monthly check. Bennett had bought me for the promise of my potential. I was not just a person anymore. I was a piece on a chessboard. And as I watched the miles tick up on the odometer, I realized I had no idea what the rules of this game were. I only knew that the stakes were $120,000 high, and I was playing for my life. The Halcyon Harbor Group did not run like a company. It ran like a finely tuned, highly funded military operation disguised as a hospitality firm. If the Harbor Skillet Diner was a rowboat leaking water, Halcyon was a nuclear submarine. Every minute was accounted for. Every interaction with a guest was measured against a set of key performance indicators that were tracked in real time on dashboards I had access to on my phone. I absorbed it all. The years of juggling 6 tables, a screaming short-order cook, and a broken milkshake machine had rewired my brain for chaos management. when a VIP guest at our flagship property in Uptown Charlotte threatened to sue because his suite was not facing the exact angle of the sunrise he preferred. The other junior managers panicked. I did not. I walked into the suite, listened to him scream for 4 minutes without blinking, and then offered him a solution that cost the company $0 but made him feel like a king. My direct supervisor, a woman named Sarah with hair so tight it looked painful, called me into her office the next day. "You have a cold head and a warm heart." "Hayes," she said, looking at me like I was a biological curiosity. "We usually have to train the panic out of new hires for 6 months. You are already operating at a senior level." I got a raise 3 months in. I got a better office. I was moving so fast I barely had time to check my bank account, where the automatic transfers to Glenn and Darlene were leaving every month like clockwork. But amidst the blur of success, there was a quiet, persistent shadow. Bennett Kessler. He did not act like a CEO. He acted like a haunting. He would appear in the employee lounge while I was making coffee. He would show up in the back of a meeting room while I was presenting a quarterly report. He never interfered with the work, but afterwards, he would corner me. He never asked about the occupancy rates. He never asked about the guest satisfaction scores. "Tell me, Marlo," he asked one rainy Tuesday, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window in my office, "what is your earliest memory?" I paused, my hand hovering over my keyboard. It was such an odd question for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. "I think it was the smell of the ocean," I said carefully, "and the sound of the screen door at the diner slamming shut." "Nothing before that?" he pressed, turning to look at me with those intense gray eyes. "Nothing from before the Hayes family?" "No, sir," I said. "I was very young when they took me in." He nodded, but he looked disappointed. He looked like a man reading a book with the first 10 pages torn out. A week later, he stopped me in the hallway. "Do you have your original adoption papers, Marlo?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I stopped walking, clutching my tablet to my chest. "Excuse me?" I asked. "For the insurance audit," he said smoothly, though the lie was thin, "we need to verify the legal status of all beneficiaries. Since you have no spouse, your next of kin is listed as your parents. We need to see the chain of custody." "I do not have them here," I stammered. "I think my mother keeps them in a safe box in Charleston." "Get them," he said, "or get copies. It is important." His tone was not administrative, it was urgent. That night, I logged into the state employee portal. I needed to update my tax forms anyway, and I realized I had never actually looked at my own legal history. Glenn and Darlene had always handled the paperwork. "You are ours," Darlene would say. "That is all that matters." I requested a digital copy of my vital records using my Social Security number. When the PDF loaded on my laptop screen, I sat in my expensive, company-paid apartment and stared at it. The document was a scan of a scan, grainy and faded. It was a petition for adoption, dated 34 years ago. But the date was wrong. I was born in 1991. The adoption decree was dated 1994. That part was fine. I knew I was a toddler when they got me, but the location of the filing was listed as a county court in rural Georgia, not South Carolina. I had never stepped foot in Georgia in my life. Glenn and Darlene had never mentioned living in Georgia. They always said they had lived in Charleston for generations. I zoomed in on the signature line. Darlene's signature was there, loopy and dramatic even back then, but the signature for the biological surrender, the line where my birth parents should have signed, was illegible. It was just a scratch, and next to it, there was a stamp from a notary public. The stamp was too faded to read clearly, but the expiration date of the notary's commission was visible. It expired in 1990. My blood ran cold. If the notary commission expired in 1990, how could they stamp a document in 1994? I grabbed my phone and called Caleb. He answered on the first ring, the sound of a TV in the background. "Marlo, you okay? You sound like you ran a sprint." "I need you to look something up," I said, my voice shaking. I sent him the screenshot. "Look at the date. Look at the notary stamp." I heard him typing. Silence stretched for a long minute. "Marlo," Caleb said, his voice dropping to that serious tone he used when an engine was beyond repair. "This does not look right. I am looking at the Georgia Public Records Index. There is no record of a petition filed under the name Hayes in that county in 1994. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means the paperwork might be forged," he said, "or it was filed in a sealed juvenile court. But even then, the notary stamp is a red flag, a big one. And Marlowe, there is something else." "What?" "Interstate adoptions require something called an ICPC compact. It is a federal law. If you were born in one state and adopted in another, there is a paper trail a mile long. I cannot find a single digital footprint of you moving across state lines until you got your driver's license at 16. I felt the room spinning. For 30 years, I thought I was just an unwanted kid that Glenn and Darlene took pity on. But you do not forge documents for a charity case. You forge documents to hide something." The next day, Bennett came to my office again. He closed the door behind him. "Did you find the papers?" he asked. I looked at him. I looked at this billionaire who had plucked me out of obscurity and placed me in a glass tower. "I found inconsistencies," I said, choosing my word carefully. Bennett pulled up a chair and sat down. He did not look surprised. He looked relieved. "I had a niece," he said softly. "Her name was Evelyn. She disappeared 35 years ago. She was troubled. She ran away with a man my family did not approve of. We cut her off. We thought tough love would bring her back." He looked at his hands. They were trembling slightly. "We were wrong. She died in a car accident in Savannah, Georgia. We were told her infant daughter died with her, but there was no body for the child. Just an empty car seat." The air in the room vanished. "I am not Evelyn," I whispered. "No," Bennett said, "you are not. But I have spent 20 years looking for that empty car seat. I have hired detectives. I have chased leads. And 3 months ago, a private investigator found a connection between a nurse who worked at that hospital in Savannah and a woman named Darlene Hayes in Charleston." He looked up at me, and his eyes were full of a pain so deep it looked like it had been carved into his bones. "I am not just your boss. Marlowe, I am an old man trying to fix a mistake that has haunted me for 3 decades. I brought you here because I needed to be sure. I needed to see if you had her spirit, if you had her resilience." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was old. The colors shifted toward red. It showed a young woman laughing, holding a baby. The woman had my nose. The baby had my eyes. "I do not know if you are her," Bennett said. "But the papers you found? The forged dates? That is the thread, and if we pull it, I think we are going to find that Glenn and Darlene did not adopt you out of the goodness of their hearts." He leaned forward, his voice hard as steel. "I think they were paid to take you, and I think they were paid to keep you hidden." I sat back in my ergonomic office chair, overlooking the city of Charlotte. The view was beautiful, the salary was incredible, but suddenly, none of it mattered. I was not an employee, I was evidence. It was raining that Tuesday night, a cold, relentless downpour that blurred the lights of the Charlotte skyline outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. The apartment the company had provided was sleek, modern, and utterly devoid of personality. It felt less like a home and more like a waiting room for a life that had not quite started yet. When the buzzer rang at 11 o'clock, I knew who it was. I opened the door to find Bennett Kessler standing in the hallway. He was alone. No security detail. No driver. He was wearing a trench coat that was damp at the shoulders. And for the first time since I met him, he looked his age. His skin was gray. His eyes rimmed with red exhaustion. He held a thick, weathered accordion folder under his arm. "May I come in?" he asked. His voice lacked its usual command. It sounded hollow. I stepped aside. I did not offer him coffee. I did not offer him a seat. I just watched as he walked to the glass dining table and placed the folder down. It landed with a heavy, dull thud. "We need to finish the conversation we started in my office," he said, unbuttoning his coat. I walked over to the table. "Is this the part where you tell me I am the lost princess?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is this where you tell me I am Evelyn's daughter and I inherit the kingdom?" Bennett looked at me, and his expression shattered the fairy tale before it could even take a breath. "No," he said softly. "I wish you were. I truly wish you were Evelyn's blood. It would make this easier. It would make me a hero." He opened the folder. The smell of old paper and mildew drifted up, mixing with the sterile scent of the apartment's air conditioning. "You are not my granddaughter, Marlowe," he said. "You are the receipt for a crime I allowed to happen." I froze. A crime? 34 years ago, Halcyon Harbor Group established a charitable trust for dock workers in Charleston. He began, his fingers tracing a faded document. It was a PR move. We put $2 million into it. 6 months later, the money was gone, embezzled. I stared at the papers. I saw spreadsheets. I saw bank transfers. My nephew, Russell, the man who is currently trying to push me out of my own board chair, was the one managing the fund. Bennett continued. He stole it. He used it to cover gambling debts and bad real estate bets. But he could not get caught. It would have destroyed the company's stock. We were about to go public. "So you found a scapegoat," I whispered. Bennett nodded. There was a young woman working in the accounts department at the Charleston shipyard. She was smart. She noticed the discrepancies. She tried to blow the whistle. He pulled out a photograph. It was a mugshot. The woman in the photo looked terrified. She had dark hair and wide eyes. My eyes. Her name was Sarah Miller. Bennett said. Russell and his lawyers framed her. They planted evidence. They destroyed her reputation. She was facing 20 years in prison for a theft she did not commit. But Sarah had a problem. She had a 6-month-old baby girl. She had no family, no support system. She knew if she went to prison, the baby would go into the system. I felt the blood drain from my face. I am Sarah's daughter. Bennett did not look away. He forced himself to hold my gaze. Russell made a deal. He said he told Sarah if she pleaded guilty and went away quietly, he would ensure her daughter was placed with a good family, a family that would be paid to take care of her. He slid another document across the table. It was a bank statement from 1991. It showed a wire transfer of $50,000. The recipient was Glenn Hayes. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. "Glenn?" I choked out. "My dad? Glenn who flips burgers and complains about the price of ketchup?" Glenn was a dock foreman back then. Bennett said he was known for being able to keep his mouth shut for the right price. He and Darlene took the $50,000. They took the baby. And they signed a non-disclosure agreement that said they would never tell the child where she came from. I looked at the number on the page, $50,000. That was my price. That was what I was worth. They did not want a daughter. I realized, the words tasting like bile, they wanted the payout. And when the money ran out, Bennett added ruthlessly, they realized they still had the asset, you. They realized they could guilt you into working. They realized they could make you pay them back for a charity they had already been compensated for. Everything made sense. The coldness, the lack of baby photos, the way Darlene would look at me not with love, but with calculation. I was not a child to them. I was a lingering obligation that had turned into a profit center. "And you knew?" I asked, my voice rising. "You knew this whole time?" "I knew about the embezzlement," Bennett admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I knew we paid people off. I chose not to look at the details. I chose the company over the truth. I let an innocent woman go to prison, where she died 3 years later of pneumonia, and I let her child disappear into the ether." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, coughing into it. When he pulled it away, I saw a speck of blood. "I am dying. Marlowe," he said, "the doctors give me 2 months, maybe 3. He looked at the papers scattered on the table. "I spent my life building an empire on top of that woman's grave. When I found you, when my investigators finally tracked down the Hayes family, I wanted to see if you had survived them. I wanted to see if they had broken you. You tested me," I said, anger boiling up in my chest. "You came to the diner. You left the note. You played games with my life to see if I was worthy of the truth?" "Yes," Bennett said simply. "Because if you were weak, if you were like Glenn and Darlene, I would have just cut you a check and walked away. I would have bought my conscience clean. But you were not weak. You were formidable." He stood up, bracing himself against the table. "I cannot give you your mother back. Marlowe, I cannot give you the 30 years of love you should have had, but I can give you the weapon to burn the people who did this." He tapped the folder. "Russell thinks this trail is dead. He thinks Glenn and Darlene are loyal dogs who will stay silent forever. He thinks I am a senile old man who is about to die and leave him the keys to the kingdom." Bennett looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the shark underneath the suit, the man who had built a billion-dollar company. "I am going to change my will," he said. "I am going to leave you the control of the trust that holds the evidence, but I cannot do it alone. I need someone on the inside who knows the operation. I need someone who is willing to stand in front of a judge and destroy her own family to get to the truth." He extended a hand toward me. It was shaking, but his eyes were steady. "So, Marlowe Hayes, the question is simple. Do you want to keep sending $500 a month to the people who bought you like a used car? Do you want to remain a victim? Or," he paused, his voice hardening, "do you want to be the one who ends this story?" I looked at the bank statement. I looked at the $50,000 transfer that had sealed my fate. I looked at the mugshot of the mother I never knew, a woman who had died alone in a cell to save me. I did not see Glenn and Darlene as parents anymore. I saw them as jailers, and I saw Bennett not as a savior, but as a repentant accomplice handing me the keys to the demolition crew. I did not take his hand, not yet. I reached for the folder and pulled it close to my chest. "I do not just want to end it," I said, my voice cold and unfamiliar to my own ears. "I want a refund, with interest." Bennett smiled. It was a grim, terrifying smile. "Then let us get to work," he said. The decline of Bennett Kessler was not a slow fade. It was a cliff dive. 3 weeks after he showed me the files in my apartment, he collapsed during a board meeting. For the next 10 days, I lived a double life that was shredding me at the seams. By day, I was the junior director of guest experience, smiling at investors and putting out fires at our luxury properties. By night, I was the only person sitting by the bedside of a dying billionaire in the VIP wing of Charlotte Memorial Hospital. He could barely speak toward the end. The oxygen mask was a permanent fixture, and the machines around him beeped in a rhythm that felt like a countdown. But his eyes were alert. He would grip my hand with a strength that surprised me, his gaze intense, reminding me of the pact we had made. He was the only person on earth who knew my real name, not the name on my driver's license, but the name of the daughter Sarah Miller had tried to save. Then, at 4 a.m. on a rainy Friday, the grip loosened, the machines wailed, and I was alone. The funeral was a spectacle of black umbrellas and fake tears. I stood in the back, watching people who had feared him pretending to love him. But the moment the first shovel of dirt hit the casket, the atmosphere shifted, the grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, predatory hunger. I felt it the moment I walked into the Halcyon headquarters on Monday morning. My ID badge, which usually beeped with a cheerful green light, flashed red, access denied. I tried again, red. The security guard at the front desk, a man named Mike who usually asked me about my weekend, would not look me in the eye. "I am sorry. Ms. Hayes," he mumbled, staring at his shoes. "I have orders. You are restricted to the lobby. Someone will come down to escort you." "Escort me?" I asked. "I work here." "Mike, my office is on the 42nd floor. "Not anymore," a voice said from behind me. I turned around. Standing there was a man who looked like a younger, sharper, and infinitely crueler version of Bennett. He had the same jawline, but where Bennett's eyes had been gray steel, this man's eyes were black glass. Russell Kessler, Bennett's nephew, the man who had embezzled the charity fund 34 years ago, the man who had framed my mother. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than the Harbor Skillet Diner's annual revenue. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Hello." "Marlowe," Russell said. He said my name like it was a stain he wanted to wipe off his shoe. I am afraid there have been some restructuring changes effective immediately. The board feels that given your lack of traditional qualifications, your position is no longer tenable without Bennett here to protect you. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and mints. We are prepared to offer you 3 months of severance, he said smoothly. Enough to get you back to Charleston. I hear the diner business is tough these days. You should go help your parents. They sound like such charming people. The threat was subtle but clear. I know who you are. I own your parents. Go away. I did not flinch. I will wait for the official notice from HR. I said. Russell chuckled. You are tenacious. I see why my uncle liked you. He always did have a soft spot for stray dogs. By noon, the war had moved from the lobby to the internet. My phone started vibrating so hard, it nearly fell off the table in the coffee shop where I had retreated. I opened a news app. The headline was screaming at me. The Billionaire's Waitress. How a diner server seduced her way into the halcyon C-suite. The article was vicious. It claimed I had no degree, no experience, and that my rapid promotion was due to an inappropriate relationship with an 80-year-old man. It hinted that I was a gold digger who had manipulated a senile CEO. There were photos of me waitressing at the Skillet, looking sweaty and tired, juxtaposed with photos of me in my new suits, looking, according to the caption, smug. My inbox flooded with hate mail, but then a physical letter arrived at my apartment building. It had been slid under my door. No stamp. I opened it. The paper was plain. The letters cut from magazines like something out of a bad movie, but the message was terrifyingly real. Leave Halcyon or lose everything. We know about the forged adoption papers. We know about the fraud. Do you want to go to prison like your mother? I sat on my floor, shaking. They were using the very crime they had committed against me as a weapon to silence me. They were threatening to frame me for the forgery that Glenn and Darlene had executed. The next day, I received a call from Alden Price, Bennett's personal attorney. Mr. Price was an old-school lawyer, a man who wore bow ties and believed in the sanctity of paper. He asked me to come to his office for the reading of the will. When I arrived, the conference room was full. Russell was there, sitting at the head of the table, looking bored. 3 other board members were present. They looked at me with open disdain. Let us get this over with. Russell sighed, checking his watch. We know the old man left everything to the foundation. Just give the girl her token bequest. What is it, $5,000? And let her go. Alden Price adjusted his glasses. He opened the heavy document in front of him. Mr. Kessler has indeed left the majority of his liquid assets to the Kessler Foundation. Price began. However, there is a specific codicil regarding the Halcyon Internal Archives and the family trust known as the Phoenix Trust. Russell waved a hand. Yes, the dusty old files. Who cares? Price looked up, his eyes sharp. Mr. Kessler has left full executive control of the Phoenix Trust, including exclusive, unrestricted access to all physical and digital archives of the Halcyon Harbor Group dating back 40 years. To Ms. Marlowe Hayes. The room went dead silent. Russell froze. The boredom vanished from his face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Excuse me? Russell whispered. The archives? Furthermore, Price continued, his voice steady, the trust is endowed with $50 million, specifically allocated for the purpose of auditing and organizing said archives. Ms. Hayes has the sole authority to release any findings she deems relevant to the public interest. Russell stood up so fast his chair tipped over and crashed onto the floor. That is insane, he shouted, slamming his hands on the table. You cannot give her the archives. Those are company property. There is confidential information in there. Trade secrets. It is a private trust. Russell, Price said calmly, and Bennett owned the archives personally. They are his to give, and he gave them to her. Russell turned to me. His face was red, a vein bulging in his forehead. The smooth corporate mask was gone. I saw the thug underneath. You will not touch those files, he hissed. I will tie this up in court for 10 years. I will bankrupt you. I will destroy you. I stood up. My legs were trembling, but I locked my knees. I looked at Russell, and I thought of the $50,000 he had paid for me. I thought of my mother dying in a cell. I thought of the note under the plate. If you want to change your life, come here. Bennett had not given me money to buy a yacht. He had given me the ammunition to blow up the building. You can try. Russell, I said, my voice cutting through the tension, but I have $50 million to pay for lawyers, and I have nothing else to do. I walked toward the door. As I passed Russell, he lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Who do you think you are? He snarled. You are a nobody. You are a waitress. I pulled my arm away, dusting off the sleeve of my jacket. I am the tip you forgot to pay, I said. I walked out of the office, leaving the chaos behind me. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close on Russell's screaming face. I was alone again, but as the elevator descended, I did not feel fear. I felt the cold, hard weight of responsibility. Bennett had left me a legacy. All right, he had left me a war, and for the first time in my life, I was the one with the big guns. The security at the Phoenix Trust offices was tighter than the diner's budget had ever been, but somehow, Glenn and Darlene talked their way up. Perhaps it was the Tearful Parents Act. They had rehearsed it for 30 years, after all. When I walked into the reception area, I saw them sitting on the sleek Italian leather sofa. They looked shrunken. The grandeur of the glass walls and the skyline view seemed to press down on them, making them look like two confused tourists who had lost their tour group. But the moment they saw me, the performance began. Marley! Darlene cried out, launching herself off the couch. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling in a way that looked almost genuine. Oh, thank God. We have been so worried. The news, the papers, they are saying terrible things about you. She tried to hug me. I did not step back, but I did not lean in. I stood as rigid as a steel beam. Her arms wrapped around me, and I smelled the familiar scent of stale hairspray and desperation. We are here to help, Glenn said, stepping up behind her. He was twisting his baseball cap in his hands. We told the receptionist we are family. We are here to bring you home. Marlo, this place. It is not safe. It is eating you alive. I gently but firmly removed Darlene's arms from my waist. Come into my office, I said. I led them past the rows of analysts who were busy dissecting the financial history of the Halcyon Empire. I closed the door to my office and sat behind my desk. I did not offer them a seat. They sat anyway, huddling together in the chairs opposite me like two children called to the principal's office. The diner is under, Glenn blurted out. He could not hold the preamble any longer. The bank called yesterday. They are foreclosing on Tuesday. We are going to lose everything. Marlo, the house, the business, your legacy. My legacy, I repeated. The word sounded foreign. We need $40,000 to stop the seizure, Darlene sobbed. Just a loan. We know you have access to the money now. We read about the trust. $50 million. Marlo, and you are letting your parents starve? I looked at them. I looked at the people who had taken $50,000 to raise a child they did not want, and who were now asking for $40,000 more to fix the mistakes they had made. I have a question, I said, my voice quiet and devoid of the anger I used to feel. Darlene wiped her nose with a tissue. Anything, baby. Are you here to save me? I asked. Or are you here to save the building? The room went silent. Darlene blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked at Glenn. Glenn looked at his knees. That is not fair, Glenn muttered, his face flushing red. We are here for both. You are our daughter. We love you, but we cannot let the family business die. It is all we have. It is all you have to come back to when this whole thing blows up in your face. And it will blow up, Darlene added quickly. That man, Russell, he is powerful. Marlo, he can hurt you. If you come home now, if you just walk away from this madness, we can be a family again. We can work the diner together, just like before. Just like before. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. They wanted me back in the cage. They wanted the workhorse back in the stable, generating profit, keeping their secrets. My computer pinged. It was a message from Caleb. He was downstairs in the lobby, but he had sent me a file. Check your email. The text read, I found the link. I turned my monitor so they could not see it and opened the attachment. It was a scanned copy of a ledger from a shell company called Palmetto Logistics. The company was a subsidiary of Halcyon. There was a transaction dated 2 weeks ago. $5,000 paid to Glenn Hayes. And another transaction pending for $50,000, conditional on service rendered. I felt the pieces click together in my mind with the precision of a loaded gun. Russell had not just threatened me, he had recruited them. I looked up at Glenn. You met with Russell Kessler, didn't you? I asked. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Glenn's head snapped up. Darlene stopped crying instantly. I do not know what you are talking about, Glenn said, but his voice cracked. Do not lie to me. Dad, I said. The word felt like a weapon. I have the ledger. I see the payment. $5,000 up front, and $50,000 more if you do what? If you testify that I am mentally unstable? If you tell the court that Bennett manipulated me? Glenn stood up, his face shifting from pathetic to angry in a heartbeat. He offered to save the diner, Glenn shouted. You were not helping us. You were sitting up here in your ivory tower, playing queen, while we were drowning. Russell said if we just helped him clarify the situation, if we just explained that you have always been a little imaginative, a little prone to making up stories, he would clear the mortgage. Darlene grabbed his arm, looking terrified. Glenn, stop. He promised us security, Glenn continued, ignoring her. What have you promised us? Marlowe? Shame? Exposure? You want to drag our names through the mud because of some ancient history? I leaned back in my chair. I watched them unravel. I saw the fear in Darlene's eyes. But it was not fear for me. It was fear of the consequences. They were prepared to go into a courtroom and paint me as a liar and a lunatic. They were prepared to destroy my credibility to save their fryer and their griddle. They were selling me out for the second time in my life. The first time was for $50,000. This time, adjusted for inflation. The price was exactly the same. I felt a strange sense of calm. The last tether that held me to them, that nagging biological guilt, snapped. I stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. Okay, I said. Glenn blinked. Okay, what? Okay, I will help you. I lied. Darlene let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 10 minutes. You will? I turned around and looked at them. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I cannot give you the money directly. I said, the trust is audited, but I can make a deal. If you want to save the diner, you need to be on the winning side. Russell is losing. Glenn, he is desperate. That is why he came to you. I walked back to my desk and picked up a pen. I am going to court next week to present the evidence from the archives. I said, if you two testify on my behalf, if you tell the truth about the adoption and the money you took 30 years ago, I will use my personal inheritance to pay off the diner's mortgage, in full. Glenn and Darlene exchanged a look. It was the look of two rats trying to decide which sinking ship had a better life raft. But Russell said, Darlene started. Russell is going to prison. I cut her off. Do you want to be listed as his accomplices? Or do you want to be the victims who came forward? Glenn licked his lips. He was calculating. He was greedy, and greed makes people predictable. You will pay off the mortgage? Glenn asked. In writing? I will have my lawyer draft it. I said, but you have to do exactly what I say. You have to meet me at the courthouse on Monday, and you have to bring the original adoption papers, the real ones. We do not have. Darlene started. Find them, I commanded, or the deal is off. Glenn nodded slowly. Okay. Marley, we can do that. We are family, right? We stick together. Get out, I said softly. They scrambled for the door, clutching the hope of money like a lifeline. When they were gone, I sat down and exhaled. My hands were not shaking. I picked up the phone and dialed Alden Price. Mr. Price? I said, I need you to prepare a witness list for the hearing on Monday. And then I called Caleb. Did you get it? I asked. I got it, Caleb said. The security cameras in the lobby recorded the whole conversation. The audio is crystal clear. I have Glenn admitting he took money from Russell. I have him admitting he was going to lie about your mental state. Good, I said. You know they are going to betray you again on Monday, right? Caleb warned. They are going to try to play both sides. I know, I said, looking at the empty space where my parents had sat. I am counting on it. I was not saving the diner. I was not saving the family. I was setting the table for a banquet of consequences. And on Monday, everyone was going to eat. The courtroom was cold, smelling of floor wax and stale anxiety. Russell Kessler sat at the plaintiff's table, looking like he had already won. He wore a navy suit that cost more than my parents' house, and he tapped a gold pen against the mahogany table with a rhythmic, irritating click. Glenn and Darlene sat in the gallery behind him. They would not look at me. They were staring straight ahead, clutching their purses and hats, waiting for their moment to save their drowning diner by drowning me. The Honorable Judge Vance called the court to order. Russell's lawyer, a man with a smile like a shark, stood up. He painted a picture of me that was truly impressive in its creativity. He called me a predator. He called me a manipulative opportunist who had preyed on a lonely, dying old man to steal a legacy that belonged to the family. She was a waitress, the lawyer sneered, pointing a finger at me, a woman of no education, no background, who suddenly found herself controlling $50 million and the private archives of one of the largest companies in America. Does that sound like a business decision to you? Or does it sound like undue influence? I sat quietly next to Mr. Price. I did not flinch. I did not object. I just waited. Then, they called Glenn Hayes to the stand. Glenn walked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. He swore to tell the truth. Russell nodded at him, a subtle gesture of encouragement. Stick to the script, and I pay the mortgage. Mr. Hayes, the lawyer asked, did your daughter ever express a desire to extract money from wealthy patrons? Glenn hesitated. He looked at Russell. He looked at me. She always wanted more than what we could give her. Glenn stammered. She was ambitious. She talked about leaving, about finding a rich way out. Russell smiled. Mr. Price stood up. He did not ask Glenn a question. He simply walked to the evidence table and picked up a small flash drive. Your Honor, he said, we would like to submit a piece of rebuttal evidence. It is a digital recording taken 3 days ago in the lobby of the Phoenix Trust. Russell's smile faltered. Glenn went pale. Price played the audio. The voice of Russell Kessler filled the courtroom, clear and arrogant. If you testify that she is mentally unstable, if you say Bennett was manipulated, I will clear the mortgage, $50,000, clean slate. Then Glenn's voice, you will pay it off? In writing? The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Glenn looked like he was about to vomit. Russell jumped up. This is a fabrication, he shouted. That is AI. That is fake. Sit down. Mr. Kessler, Judge Vance barked. We are not done. Your Honor, I said, standing up for the first time. I walked to the podium. I was not the girl in the apron anymore. I was the CEO of my own life. I presented the documents. I projected the spreadsheets onto the screen. I showed the court the transaction from 34 years ago, the $50,000 stolen from the dock workers' charity fund, and then I drew a red line to the wire transfer Russell had sent to a shell company last week. It is the same modus operandi. I told the jury, he steals from the company to pay for his silence. 34 years ago, he paid my parents to hide his embezzlement and take in a baby he wanted to disappear. Today, he is paying them to hide his history. Russell was shaking his head, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple, but I was not finished. I played the video. The screen flickered to life, showing Bennett Kessler sitting in his hospital bed 2 days before he died. He looked frail, but his eyes were sharp as diamonds. A notary and a doctor were in the room. Bennett Kessler, being of sound mind, leave the archives to Marlo Hayes, Bennett said on the screen. Not because she seduced me, but because she is the only one in this family with a spine. Russell is going to try to take it. He is going to try to bury the truth. Do not let him." The video ended. The jury looked at Russell with open disgust. But I had one last thing, the final nail. "Your Honor," I said, "the plaintiff claims I found a note under a plate and used it to manipulate Mr. Kessler, but he missed the point. The note was not the key. The plate was—" I reached into the evidence box and pulled out a white ceramic dinner plate. It was chipped at the rim. It was the plate Bennett had eaten off of that Tuesday at the Harbor Skillet. "Mr. Kessler bought this plate from a restaurant liquidation sale 5 years ago," I explained. "He owned the company that supplied the diner. He knew exactly which batch of china we used." I turned the plate over. Under the glaze, etched into the ceramic in microscopic UV ink, was a series of numbers. I held up a UV light. The numbers glowed neon blue. "This is the access code to the encrypted partition of the Phoenix Trust servers," I said. Bennett did not trust paper. He etched the key onto the one object he knew I would handle. I typed the code into the court computer. A file opened on the main screen. It was a digital letter, dated the day he walked into the diner. The clerk read the final paragraph aloud. "I did not leave a tip, because a tip is small change. I left you the truth. If you are reading this, it means you found the courage to stop serving others and start serving justice. I did not leave you money. Marlowe, I left you the gun. Pull the trigger." The gavel came down like a thunderclap. The court ruled against Russell Kessler on all counts. The evidence from the archives was turned over to the district attorney. Russell was arrested before he could even leave the building, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and witness tampering. Glenn and Darlene were detained for questioning. They avoided heavy prison time by cooperating against Russell, but the bridge was burned. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. Glenn was standing by a police cruiser, looking at me with wet, pleading eyes. "Marlowe," he called out, "we did it for the family. You know that, right?" I stopped. I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the indifference you feel for a stranger on the street. "I know," I said, "and that is why I am not family anymore." I turned and walked away. I did not keep the money for myself. I used the $50 million to reestablish the dock workers' charity, transparent and bulletproof. I started a scholarship fund for service industry workers who wanted to go back to school. I named it the Sarah Miller Initiative. I never went back to the diner. I heard it was sold to a developer who turned it into a parking lot. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in my office overlooking the city, I think about that Tuesday. I think about the zero tip. Most people would have been angry. Most people would have complained. But Bennett was right. Anger is cheap. Justice is expensive. And I was finally rich enough to afford it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let us share our thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people. See you in the next drama.